for Jesus, not just the campus, the entire world. So we're in the middle of 5 weeks right now, just looking at some different worldviews, ones that you will likely find on this campus and certainly in the greater world. So we started with Catholicism, then we did Mormonism last week. Was that fun? Like with Ben Sutton, straight from Utah. Yeah, got him zoomed in. So we got Hinduism today. Islam is next week. Atheism is going to be the following week after that. So yeah, these are all, again, all 5 of these are ones that we're going to encounter here at this campus. So it's good to just learn a bit. And so today we've got Bud Houston in, who's going to be speaking for us today. I really enjoyed getting to know Bud over the last couple of years. He's done some really great trainings for us. I'll let him kind of tell a little more of his background, but he's been working with an organization called Global Gates. Some of you are familiar with Global Gates, maybe even kind of on a mission trip with them, but transitioning to a position with the Joshua Project, which is focused on unreached peoples of the world and helping people understand their unreached So I'll let him tell us more about that if he would like to. So let me pray for us, and we'll get going. Father, we are grateful to you, God, that you have a heart that is outward reaching, Father, that does not stay contained within yourself, Father, that you reached out to us. You sent us Jesus. You initiated contact and a relationship with us. And so, God, may we follow in your footsteps. And may we be the ones who then take the love that you have given us and extend it to others. And so I pray that you would grow us even a little bit, God, today in our ability to do that. God, may we be able to love the people of this campus and our world better today. So pray your blessing on this day. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Now give it up for Bud.
All right, hello everyone. All right, yeah. Try that again. Hello everyone. Hello. Okay, now you have more energy than I do, so that it bounces. So good, great. So yeah, I've worked with an organization called Global Gates. If you're not familiar with Global Gates, focused on reaching the ends of the earth through global gateway cities. So focused on Muslim, Hindu, Buddhist, Sikh, Jewish peoples in gateway cities, in diaspora settings, because through relationships, the gospel travels back to home country. So now I'm serving with a place called Joshua Project. How many of you heard of Joshua Project? If you want to know anything about unreached people groups, pray for unreached people groups, go to joshuaproject.net. You can sign up for an email that sends you an unreached people group of the day. There's an app, the unreached people group of the day. So if you find yourself scrolling on your phone, and it's like, you know what, you could take 4 minutes and pray for an unreached people group every day. It's a great way to stir your heart for God's kingdom where it has not yet been established, and for God to mobilize people to share the gospel, make disciples, and plant churches among the unreached. So that's what Joshua Project's about, is seeing an abundance of Christ followers among every people group. So today what I'm going to talk to you about is Hinduism. I'm actually much more experienced talking about Islam, but kind of give you an outline of what we're going to be doing. So one, you can't understand Hinduism without a little bit of understanding about India, South Asia as a whole. You can't understand Hinduism without South Asia. So we're going to do a little bit of India, Hindu kind of background, how it came to the point where it's at today. And then I'm going to share with you a way to share the gospel with Hindus using the 3 circles. It's a modified 3 circles. So most of you are probably familiar with 3 circles. Show of hands. Okay, so we're just going to change it a little bit to better connect with where their mind and heart is. And then the final thing, this is time pending, the final thing we'll do is I'll show you how to share the gospel with a Hindu using a coconut. This is not necessarily like one-on-one evangelism, but like if you can have 5 or 6 Indian friends over to your apartment for a meal, and then you just start telling the story with a coconut, it's a great way to share the gospel. So I'm going to model that on the 3 circles. I'm not just going to model it, but you're going to practice it, because there is a little bit of difference. So our time is short, so let's get into first talking about India. Is anyone here from India? Okay. What state? Andhra Pradesh. Okay. Do you speak Telugu? Yeah. Dhanyabad. As a Hindi. Okay. Sorry. Again, I told you. A little bit out of the water here. Okay. So India has over 1 billion people. 1 billion people is a lot of people. We can leave it at that. It's about 80% Hindu. Because it has such a large population, it also has a really, really large Muslim population. The second most Muslim country in the world is actually India. That's 80% Hindus. That gives some context of how many people live in India. So there's probably about 12 to 15% that are Muslim. 2 to 3% is Christian. And then you also have Sikhism, which is predominantly in the Punjab area of India as well. So you think of the world's major religions, you may be thinking, what about Buddhism? Buddhism actually started in Nepal, which people would say is part of kind of the arm of India a little bit. So you have all the world religions in South Asia. So it creates this very broad, multicultural experience. But that's not really true. It's not really a multicultural experience because you have this nuance of what I already mentioned, a people group. A people group meaning a language, a culture, a religion that separates people from other people. And then not only is it language, culture, religion, but one thing that happens as a result of just kind of the 80% of Hinduism in India is a caste system. So then, because I was born to a family that is this caste and you were born into a family that was this caste, oftentimes it's looked at as like we don't associate with one another. So you don't get necessarily a great share of ideas. So there's something that can be said about India. This is a quote. It says, "Whatever you can say rightly about India, the opposite is also true." And so what does that mean? Everything that I'm going to say about India is true, but it's also false. And that should drive you to understand that I can't give blanket statements about India or Hinduism. That means you have to ask these questions of your Hindu friends. Because Hinduism in Andhra Pradesh is different than Hinduism in Delhi. It's very different. Like I say, a lot of my Hindu friends from Andhra Pradesh, I joke with them, I say, "You're not really good Hindus." And they're like, "Why?" I was like, "Do you follow a guru?" And they say, "No, I don't follow a guru." I'm like, "Oh, you're not a good Hindu." But that's just like the flavor of Hinduism in Andhra Pradesh. Are there people who follow gurus in Andhra Pradesh? Yes. Both true and false at the exact same time. It's good to think of India not as a country, but more like the European Union. So does anybody know how many languages are spoken in India? A lot. That's a great answer. A lot. When we think of countries from a Western context, typically we think of some sort of homogenous unit. There's a shared culture, there's a shared language. Like in the United States, is there multiculturalism? Is there diversity of ethnicity? Yes, but we know that the dominant language is what? We're all speaking English. We know that the dominant religion is some form of Christianity, right? Air quotes. You can't say that about India. It's very, very diverse based off geography, but then even within geography, there's a lot of Muslims in Andhra Pradesh, right? There's a lot of Muslims in Andhra Pradesh. So it's better to think of India like the European Union. It makes sense that Belgium speaks a different language than Britain. It makes sense that Bosnia speaks a different language than Kosovo. It makes sense that Kosovo is predominantly 99% Muslim. France is Catholic. Take that idea and you place it on India. So one of the questions that's really, really helpful for you to ask your friends that are from India is like, what state are you from? And then you just start asking questions because you don't know anything about anyone by just knowing they're from India. It's very diverse. So when we think about a Hindu becoming a follower of Jesus, is that a good goal? A Hindu becoming a follower of Jesus, is that a good goal? Okay, good. Yes. That is a good goal. Let me frame it a little bit differently. A Hindu becoming a Christian. Is that a good or bad motivation? From your perspective, it's good. From their perspective, it's bad. In a Hindu culture, from a Hindu family, from a Hindu majority country, becoming a Christian means you just lost your birthright. Becoming a Christian it means that you have rejected your family. Becoming a Christian means that you are identifying with what is called the Dalits, the lowest of the caste system, because the majority of Christians, not you, brother, but the majority of Christians in India are from the Dalits. So that's, if you've heard the word untouchable, like that's the idea of the Dalits. It's the lowest. So I would say our motivation isn't for our Hindu friends to become Christians. It's for our Hindu friends to love and follow Jesus. And part of evangelism with Hindus is making that nuance in your heart and mind and letting it change how you communicate the gospel to them. Because Hindus that come to the United States, not even Hindus, people from India that come to the United States, we would say are triply selected. What does that mean? They have to have a level of wealth to come to the United States. They have to have a level of education to come to the United States, and they have to have some sort of benefactor to get through the visa program. So the Hindus, the Indians that you are interacting with on this campus, they're the cream of the crop. They're coming from what we may not perceive as wealth, but from an Indian standard, they're coming from wealth. You have classes with many Indians. They're very smart, right? If they're here, they're super bright. And they got here by a level of God's providence so that they could be sitting next to you in a class. It wasn't a visa program choosing. Acts 17, Paul says that God established from one person every man. And he's established the times and boundaries that people may live so that they may seek him. Why? So that they may find him. He's not far from any one of us. Acts 17, 26, and 27. So that is the great determination, that God determined the times and boundaries. So we may think, oh, it was their wealth, it was all of these things. They were triply selected. In a sense, they were selected by God to be here in this time, in this place, so that they may encounter the gospel. So Indians here, triply selected. Coming as students, IT professionals, obviously you're interacting with students. The Indians who stay here, beyond their student visa, they're making up to a double of what the general public does. And the Indians that live in the United States, about the 2.5 million that are not students, 70% of them have a bachelor's degree or more. So they're highly educated. So when we think of like how churches typically do ministry to immigrants, how do churches typically do ministry to immigrants? Typically, our paradigm is refugees, right? You have some sort of physical need, and so what I'm trying to communicate is our Indian, Hindu friends, neighbors, let's say it's just Indian, Nepali, Bhutanese, most likely they're not going to have physical needs. Their need is purely the gospel. That is their need. Our challenge is, okay, how do we then take this unchanging word of the gospel and communicate it in a way that makes sense to their mind and their heart, and it doesn't feel like they're rejecting their family, their culture, everything to follow Jesus? Because what we do in evangelism is two things. We remove barriers and we share the gospel, right? Sometimes we think it's just share the gospel, but we have to remove barriers. And so I've shared some of the barriers, and then as we start talking about sharing, we'll talk more barriers. One thing that's really ingrained, and I would love to hear, brother, if this is in even the Indian Christian community, but in the Hindu community, there's this idea of dharma. And dharma being the responsibility, part of your responsibility is to your family. Christian community, think of dharma or something similar. No, just Hindu. Okay, thought so. Whenever a student comes from a Hindu family and they're coming to, let's say, UT Arlington to study, very, very commonly, one of the last things that their mother or father will say before they get on the airplane, whatever you do, don't become a Christian. And then you have this worldview of dharma of like, my responsibility is my family. That's a barrier, right? And the language that they said and the language that we say is important. Whatever you do, don't become a Christian. If our motivation is that they become a Christian, then do you see how now we're kind of missing? Does that make sense? So it's like, do we want them to become Christian? We want them to love and follow Jesus. They can call themselves whatever they want. If they want to identify as Christian, great. If they want to identify as a Hindu that loves and follows Jesus and worships only him, hallelujah. Because our motivation, our goal is what? That they love and follow Jesus and only worship the one true God, which means they have to put things away, right? They're worshiping, some worship millions of gods, some worship one God. Again, whatever I could say is true and false at the same time because there's a variety of beliefs in Hinduism. Whenever we make, say, like an altar call, and we press a Hindu for a decision, and we're saying, you need to make an individual decision to follow Christ, that has no register in their mind because they don't make individual decisions. They make decisions based off their family. So like them coming to school here was not an individual decision. It was a corporate decision. And so whenever we press people to make a decision, really what they're asking them to do is to do something they've never done before in their life. Any decisions that they've made that seemed like were personal decisions, they did it with the betterment of the group. It was a group decision. Just a little bit of background on what is Hinduism. Hinduism really isn't a religion, if I'm honest. Hinduism is a way of life. Hinduism is a collection of many, many, many polytheistic religions. So Hinduism actually isn't a word from South Asia. It's not a Sanskrit word, the old Indian language. It's actually a Persian word because Persia, Iran is up in Afghanistan, attached Central Asia into South Asia. They called that region Hindustan. That Hindu is a Persian word. Hindustan come from Persians. So then 150, 200 years ago, South Asia, India, is under colonial rule by the British. The British, being a very pragmatic group like us Americans, they have to classify things. So guess what they called all of those people who worshipped a variety of multiple gods and different avatars and all of these things? They said, oh, Hindustan, Hindus. So Hinduism is actually, this is a little bit of a stretch, I understand, was a creation of the British government. Not saying that there's not underlying beliefs, but this idea that there is a Hinduism, that's the result of colonial rule trying to put someone in a box. That's really what it is. All that to say, everything you say about India is both true and false at the same time. Everything you say about Hinduism is both true and false at the same time. If I say that all Hindus worship multiple gods, there are Hindus who only worship one God. It's not the one true God, but they would only worship one God. You have to have a conversation with your friends. Say, just help me understand. Baptism. Someone comes to faith. What should they pursue? Baptism. Baptism in India is not a joyous occasion. Here we think, oh, baptism in India, I have to take my government card, I have to get it changed. Christian. My family, they view me as dead. So I would just say that there's a biblical mandate for baptism. Would everyone agree with that? Be very, I'm all for baptizing people early and often. Often one time, but you know what I mean, right? Just exercise caution when your Hindu friends come to faith. It's a process because there's so much stuff that's underlying that has to be deconstructed. One of the things I said is we want to love and follow Jesus and worship only the one true God. There's things that they're going to have to deconstruct from worshiping multiple gods, from doing puja, from going to the temple. Discipleship is a process. If you're walking with a Hindu who's loving and following Jesus and they're moving towards center, meaning Jesus and his commands being center, walk with them. Oftentimes, from a Western view, we think from a bounded set, not a center set. Bounded set meaning, okay, here's the lines. Either I'm on the stage or I'm not on the stage. Someone's either not in the kingdom or in the kingdom. Do I believe there's a point in time that someone's regenerate? Yes, absolutely. The Holy Spirit comes upon them. Their name is written in the Lamb's Book of Life. But from the outside, that's all internal perspective. That's God sees it. Really what I'm concerned about is, okay, the center is Jesus, his word, his commands, his life. Are they moving toward that or are they moving away from that? With Hindus especially, if we can view discipleship and evangelism from that perspective, are they moving toward Jesus or away from Jesus? There's no neutral with Jesus. All of you individually are either making decisions that move you closer into the image and likeness of Jesus, or you're making decisions that's taking you further and further away. So that's just a little bit of, I'll take a few minutes for questions because I want to make sure that we have time to do other things. Just a little bit of a monologue on my understanding of India, the diversity, the complexity. If you hear anything, you just need to talk to your friends, which means you have to have friends who are from India, who are Hindu. Talk to them. They will tell you everything you need to know. And even within a friend group, there's going to be differences. So just be prepared for that. Any questions before we move on and start talking about, okay, how do we modify the 3 circles to share with someone who's such different worldview than we are?
So, like, for Hinduism, do they wear, like, hijabs?
They don't. They may wear a head covering that's very loose. So if you notice, like, Indian clothing is much more bright, colorful, loose, and flowing. They may wear something on their head, but it's not a religious thing. It would maybe be a cultural thing, and typically it's more loose, where hijab is more tightly wrapped. Great question.
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure I don't have any confused.
Yeah. One other thing with India is if you see a guy with a turban, he's Sikh. Sometimes they're confused with being Muslim, but if a guy has a turban on his head, they're Sikh. Another conversation for another day. Yes?
If you had one question to ask, someone from India, like what would be the first question you ask them in order to?
The first question? Great. Let me come back to that because that'll be a great transition.
On talking about people making decisions for the collective, how do we approach, I guess, maybe people who are married? Like, do we, like, I guess, like, how do we kind of push them towards, like, the gospel if they're, like, thinking about, oh, I have to make this decision almost for, like, both me and my spouse?
Yeah, so ideally, again, this is ideally, I know it gets messy because I do this. It's if you find a guy who's Hindu who has spiritual interest, you make it a group as quick as possible so she gets to experience everything that he does. This is another word I'll add about Hinduism that really shifts our paradigm of understanding, is Hinduism is very, very experiential. So if you've ever been to a Hindu temple, I can take you to a Hindu temple. There's lots of smells, sounds, tastes. It's very wow, right? All the senses are being engaged. It's experiential. There's a word that they use, anyabhav, and it's talking about the experience. In our mind, the gospel is a truth to be believed, and then we experience the love of God. For a Hindu, this is how most Hindus who have come to faith is they experience the benevolent love and power and grace of Jesus, and then the gospel explains how they could receive it. See how it's just the other way around? So what that means is answered prayers, supernatural experience, healing. They experience that, and then they start asking this question, how could the Christian God love me like that? How could the Christian God do that for me? And then the answer is the gospel. And so oftentimes we approach evangelism with, here is the truth. If you receive it, you'll experience this. For a Hindu, they're looking for experience. Right, wrong, or indifferent, that's their worldview. Any other questions? Then we can get to the transition. How do I transition to a spiritual conversation? Yes.
Is volunteering part of their, I guess, experience of, like, I guess, living it out?
Like living out their faith?
Yes.
So in a sense, really the purpose of a Hindu is to get 100% good karma. That's the only way. So the predicament, this is also transitioning in the gospel, so we'll just get to the gospel. The predicament of the Hindu is an endless cycle of sin, suffering, death, rebirth. The word in, I guess, is Hindi's samsara. So that's a word to know, is they're trying to break samsara. The only way to break samsara is to have 100% perfect karma. How do you get good karma? You do good things. So to answer your question, volunteering, doing good things, yes. 100% good karma or salvation or liberation from samsara, the word is moksh, M-O-K-S-H. That's like liberation. Like it could be translated salvation. So those two words are important in sharing the gospel. So to answer your good works question, that's what they're facing. That's what they're trying to do, is they're trying to gain good works so that their percentage of good karma goes up. But the predicament is you can never have 100% good karma because you've always done something bad that we would call sin. All right, so the question to how do I transition quickly to a spiritual conversation? It goes something like this. Hey, you do your introductions, blah, 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 and then you ask the question, what country are you from? Just because someone looks like they're from India doesn't mean they're from India, so it's okay to ask. If they say India, you already know the next question. Oh, what state? You want to be genuinely interested. Do a little geography quiz on India. Kind of know where the states are, the main cities in there. Okay, are you from this place? Are you from this place? This will go a long way in just building trust and relationship because you're legitimately saying, I'm interested. That's just common, right? That's not specific to Hindus. Then, this is the key transition question. Interesting. I always say interesting. I don't know why. Because I want to seem interested, and that's a goal. I've done a little bit of religious study on India. There's Muslims, Hindus, Buddhists, Sikhs, Christians, like all the world religions there. Jainism. Which are you? That's it. Identify the religious plurality from where they live and say, what are you? Because again, we don't want to make assumptions. We want them to identify. We're asking the question. Whatever they say, the very next statement or next question applies. Oh. So fill in the blank, in Hinduism, what have you learned about, hold on, let me back up. One more phrase, because I see you writing notes. I found that most religions are really the same. We're all trying to please God and deal with their sin issue. Then the follow-up question is, in Hinduism, what have you learned about breaking the cycle of samsara? If it was a Muslim, what have you learned about how sin is dealt with in Islam? Remember, samsara is the result of sin. Sin, suffering, death, rebirth, reincarnation. And then they're gonna tell me, because all I've done is ask questions, right? Then, once they finish answering, I'm gonna say, well, thank you for sharing. Can I share with you how I've learned samsara can be dealt with? And if they say yes, guess what you do? You share the gospel. Does that make sense? So let's recap real quick. Where are you from? Great. What state are you from? Great. Man, There's a lot of religions there, right? Muslim, Hindu, Buddha. What are you? I found that most religions are really similar. We're all trying to please God and deal with our sin issue. In Hinduism, what have you learned? Because we're not asking for a definitive answer. We're asking, what have you learned about dealing with samsara? They say, oh, this is what we do. We do dharma, we try to get good karma, but we don't know. Okay, well, can I share with you what I've learned about how to deal with samsara? And then you're set up. Are you tracking? So, like we've just said, samsara, this endless cycle of misery, suffering, death, disappointment, it just keeps going and going and going. And we long for moksha. We long to be delivered from that, to be liberated. We long for salvation. We long so much, we try to do it on our own, don't we? For some of us, we just try to keep our dharma. We keep our responsibilities. We're trying to build good karma, but we can never have perfect karma. And so that's vain and pointless. For some of us, it's pursuing religious activities. For some of us, we just don't care. We're going to live the good life. We're going to drink, we're going to party, we're going to do whatever we want because we know that we will die and we will get to live this life again. The bad news is we can never have 100% good, pure karma. But in the very beginning, Bhagwan, God, Bhagwan, he created the heavens, the earth, and the world, and the sea, and he made trees. And where God was paradise, was heaven. And God created his most special creation. People. And in the beginning, the first people, they had perfect karma. There was no bad karma, so that there was a direct relationship with Bhagwan and man. But the story goes that a serpent came and deceived man. Deceived man to not carry out his dharma. Remember, dharma is responsibility. He didn't carry out his dharma to Bhagwan. Bhagwan had told them, this is what you should do. This is your dharma. The serpent deceived him. And so what happened is they committed pap. That was not keeping the dharma of Bhagwan. Pap is the word for sin. If you say sin, it kind of goes over their head a lot of times. And man and woman, they willfully ran from Bhagwan and perfect karma. And that's why we are stuck in this cycle of samsara. But Bhagwan, God, is loving. He doesn't desire for you or me to be stuck in samsara, death, misery, suffering. And so he provided a way. One from God came down to earth. He had 100% perfect karma. His name was Prabhu Yeshu, Lord Jesus. Prabhu Yeshu He was special. He was the Sat Guru. It means true guru. The thing that the true guru must be able to do is show people the way from darkness to light. Prabhu Yeshu came to show people the way from darkness to light. Prabhu Yeshu could do miraculous signs. People who could never see, even from birth, he gave them sight. People who were lame and crippled, he gave them the ability to walk. Prabhu Yeshu was not a lover of money. You know, some religious leaders are lovers of money. He was not a lover of money. He was celibate. You may be thinking, why are these things important? Because in a Hindu's mind, a good guru are these things, and they're true about Jesus. So now you just talk about Jesus. Tell Jesus stories. Jesus is the centerpiece, right? So I'm not going to go, you can tell Jesus stories. Just brag on Jesus. That's all you got to do. If you want to actually tell a Bible story, tell a Bible story. Hey, at one time, Jesus was in a home with someone, and you just tell the story. But then you get back to, you know, whenever you go and you do puja at the temple, there's a coconut. And you break the coconut as an offering. Prabhu Yeshu came to be a sacrifice. On the outside, like the coconut, he was nothing much to look at. He was just a normal man, God who came in the flesh. But on the inside, like a coconut, he was pure white, showing his 100% pure karma. And whenever you do puja is like worship. Whenever you do puja and you break the coconut at the temple, what comes out? Pure water. Prabhu Yeshu's blood was spilled pure. The people of his day condemned him for being innocent. There was another guy who was to be killed that same day, Barabbas. The people wanted Barabbas free. Prabhu Yeshu died in the place of Barabbas. But not just dying for Barabbas, he died for me and for you. So that if we turn from our way, and we trust Prabhu Yeshu, and we follow him, then his perfect karma can be applied to our lives. That's the only way that we can escape samsara, is with perfect karma. The beautiful thing is Prabhu Yeshu, he died, shed his blood, he died, but he did not stay dead. He came back to life, he walked with his disciples, and he told them, I'm going to prepare a place for you. Guess where that place is? Back with God, back with Bhagwan. So that whenever we turn and trust and we follow Prabhu Yeshu, and we make him the king of our life, then we come into a new family. And our whole family can be a part of that. So really, I have two questions. When will you ever have perfect karma to escape samsara? And the second question is, what's keeping you from taking the free gift that Prabhu Yeshu is offering of his pureness to give you 100% pure karma so that you can escape samsara? All right. I'm going to give a quick, high level, just here's the key changes. We're not talking about brokenness, we're talking about what? Samsara. We're not drawing a crack, we're doing what? Okay? This is pretty much the same. creation. You don't have to draw like this if you don't want to. Just talk about creation. If you want to know what this is, land, water, tree. Again, I'm adding all of these things because they're very experiential. Whenever you talk about land, water, sea, trees, beauty, it connects. Not necessary. We're just talking about God, that in the beginning there was perfect karma. What took us out of perfect relationship with God? Sin or pop. The drawing here, draw a cross if you want to. That doesn't matter. If you want to talk about the coconuts, you can. But that's just talking about Jesus. Just remember, this is talk about Jesus. If you remember anything, just talk about Jesus. Prabhu Yeshu just means Lord Jesus. Then the call to action, turn, trust, follow, belong to a family, whatever language you want to get. The main thing is here. Because oftentimes you've probably heard in evangelism training, you got to get them lost. When we're talking about sin and brokenness, they're not getting lost. It's not connecting. You want to connect? Talk about samsara. Suffering, misery, sin, death. Over and over and over and over again. The other words to remember is moksha is salvation. Most people here, they're going to understand just your English words. But if you really just want to, get a heart connection, especially if Hindi is their first language, you may ask them, hey, what word do you use for liberation? What word? Then you can actually use them to help you tell it. That's the best way to do it. Yes?
Do you mind writing a couple of these words?
Yep.
Maybe like kind of the translation of it. I think it'd be super helpful, like samsara, moksha, prabhu yeshu.
Samsara, moksha, pray, prabhu yeshu. Okay, any other questions? Yes.
The name for God that you use.
Bhagwan. Yeah, so one thing I brought, this little booklet here is the Gospel of John in English with these terms replaced. So I have one right here. I have a whole case in my car. I just couldn't carry them in. So if you want multiple of these, you can have these. And if you just want to learn the terms, so if you look at it, like Yeshui heals a manager, like it's just using kind of more Hindu-related terms. It's just the Gospel of John. I'm going to go off topic real quick. It'd be good for you to get these because then you can just invite your Hindu friends to read this holy book. You don't even have to call it the Bible, just this holy book. In the very back of this, it has 10 days of Yeshu Bhakti. Yeshu we know is Jesus. Bhakti means like disciple, devotee, follower. It's a 10-day reading plan for them to read through the Gospel of John. And then it has blank pages, intentionally numbered blank pages. And then part of what it says is basically it gives them some inductive questions. Hey, what does this say about Prabhu Yeshu? What does this say about man? This is the key. This gives them the opportunity to experience God. It's, hey, for the next 10 days, pray and worship no other gods except Prabhu Yeshu. No other gods. Just 10 days. Just do it for me. And then what I want you to do is all of your prayers and worship and your requests, you write them down here. And then when we meet, let's see what Bhagwan does. Let's see what Prabhu Yeshu does. Let's see if he shows himself. And you get Anubhav of who he is. You experience who he is. So then you have to ask the question, is a Hindu moving closer to Jesus or further away from Jesus if they're reading the Gospel of John, praying and worshiping only him, and praying to him? And do you think that God just might answer their prayers? Give them the Anubhav and experience that they need. I'm voting on God on this one. Right? So now the question is, just for time's sake, what happens if, hey, maybe I have a gathering at your apartment or here, and hey, you cook some biryani, and you want to share the gospel with them? Well, stories are huge. Just tell stories. Get practice at telling Bible stories. You use the coconut to tell the passion story. So I'm going to make it simple. You practice the story, but what I want you to see is how to use the coconut. So let's say you just told a Jesus story, and you say, well, you get to the end of his life, he doesn't look like much on the outside. He was just like you and me, but he was God in the flesh. He was betrayed by his friends, and he was arrested, and he was under the authority of Pontius Pilate. And Pontius Pilate really wanted to let him go. They said, well, he hasn't done anything wrong. But the people kept calling to crucify him, to kill him. They spit on him. And they started shouting this guy's name, Barabbas, Barabbas, Barabbas. They wanted this guilty man to be set free so this innocent man could die. That's what happened. They took him, they seized him, they beat him. It says that they pulled his hair. They beat him to a pulp, almost like you couldn't even recognize him. It says that they pulled his beard, put a crown of thorns on him. He actually had to carry the crossbar of the cross that was meant for the guilty man. Remember, he was the innocent man. And just as he was going, they just kept beating him. Beating him. They get to Golgotha, this place where they murdered people. They laid him down on the crossbar, started driving nails into his hand. It's painful. And then to the next hand. The blood started to pour. But what they didn't know is they were spilling pure and holy blood. He hung there. They thought he was dead. They pierced his side. His body was broken, like this coconut. On the outside, he wasn't much to look at. But on the inside, he was pure. He had 100% perfect karma. And what he offers us is what's on the inside of him. Because the problem is, our insides look more like his outsides. We're dirty. We're filthy. We've not lived up to our dharma, our responsibility to the holy, perfect creator God. This is a true story from the Word of God. And Prabhu Yeshu offers this to you. To you, to your community, to your family, so that you can escape samsara. His words are words of life. That's why we gather and we tell stories and we read his books. $2.68 at Walmart. All right, so I'm just going to give you some tips because I want you to be able to do this. You just tell the story, and then when we finish, somebody's going to get to do this. I brought two because someone gets to practice. Like if you're like, I have to do this, this is yours. This is yours to practice. So it takes a little getting used to of how hard to do it. It was pretty hard. It's not easy, but basically you're trying to scribe around. If you notice, I was rotating it. Pow, pow, pow. For great effect, if you can get to the point where they stab them in the side and then it comes out, that's great. But whenever it comes out, then you say, and then the blood flowed. Right? So the timing is just, that's it. And Hindus use coconuts in their worship. Like in India, they may be actually sacrificing things, Here, it's just coconuts. They're sacrificing coconuts. And so it's not weird for them from a religious perspective to see this. You're taking the gospel and you're putting it in their clothes. All we're doing is talking about Jesus, telling Jesus stories, but we're trying to make it in a way that relates to who they are. So I'm going to wrap up right there. If you have questions, I'll stick around. If you want to bang on a coconut and spill some pure coconut water, feel free to. I was hoping we'd maybe have some time to practice this. There is a YouTube video that will do something very similar to this. I can share with you. The YouTube channel is called Easy Evangelism. It's a guy I work with. He's in Detroit. And it's just 3 circles for Hindus, Easy Evangelism.
I will say, we'll also put this on YouTube. Are you good with that?
Yeah, absolutely.
We'll put this on our channel, and you can watch it to your heart's content.
Yeah, okay. Thank you. Questions, I'll just hang out somewhere, and then feel free. Maybe I should do this, because there may be a lot of people who just rush and fight over this. Who's like, I can do this in the next week? Okay. All right. And maybe like if you just want to fill, maybe you share a couple of the hits. Because, how many? It took me like 10 or 12 hits. So like if you just want to fill the hit too, you're not going to, if you use like the claw side, then don't do that. All right. Good?
Yeah. Say thanks to Bud.
All right.
Is this helpful, y'all? Yes. This is super helpful, and that is a super powerful just illustration of the gospel. And it's so good to just get our minds, just to expand our minds and how do we communicate the gospel, okay? Because I know like sometimes we'll talk about the gospel kind of in very similar ways and kind of the same way. And part of that is to help us just get it ingrained in us and how do we share. But we got to realize that there are different groups of people who see the world differently on campus. And so what something like this does is just helps us start expanding and say, okay, there's going to be people who see the world differently. Therefore, I need to communicate the same message. You're not changing the content of the gospel, but you're changing how we communicate it to someone in ways that they might be better able to understand. Because honestly, here's the thing, y'all. My heart and vision, I would love if every one of us could just say the gospel just out of the overflow of our hearts, right? Like whenever anybody just needs to hear the gospel, it just comes out, and in a way that they can hear. Like that's really the goal of what we're doing here is just marinating it, letting it sink in, and looking at it in different ways as different people see the world differently, and that helps us as well. Just get the gospel deeper in our hearts so that it can just come out when the opportunity presents itself. So, let me pray for us, and then we'll split up. We'll pair up over here and go out on campus. Lord, thank you for what we've heard today. Thank you for the good news of the gospel that is good news not just for Texans or Americans, God, but for the entire world, God. And so we don't want to take for granted that the entire world has come to us and is just right across the street. God, I want to just ask that we have eyes to see, God, that you would break our hearts for this campus, God, and for the many different kinds of students that we see in this campus. God, we pray for opportunities to share the gospel. God, give us